Now picture this. You're this young scientist and you've just been given this great opportunity to study this amazing animal. However, though, you've got to study this animal in their natural habitat. So you and another scientist set up camp in the middle of the Masai Mara. You know that place where lions roam freely and animals, when they're not sleeping, they're actually hunting? Now keep in mind now, this is decades ago when there's a lot less people visiting there. In today's episode, Dr. Kay Holekamp joins me. She's one of the world's leading experts on the spotted hyena. Now, let's just fast forward over 3 decades. And Kay's wealth of information now is pretty much immeasurable. Now, did you know that hyenas can actually get up to 140 pounds and they can run up to 40 miles an hour? Now, here's a crazy thing that Kay's debunked. The idea that hyenas are actually mainly scavengers. Now, I don't know about you, but that's the picture I remember, stealing from other animals after they hunted down their kill. Now, the real truth is they actually hunt 95% of the time. Now, we all know what they look like, but did you know their pups are actually born jet black and they actually don't get their spots and coloring until much later in life? Now, here's another crazy tidbit. They're actually more related to, get this one, cats. One I would have never guessed at. Now here's another one. And by the way, there's a lot more in this episode, but, and this one's really, really cool, their mothers spend more time with their babies than any other land carnivore. Now how about their laugh? You know that famous laugh? It actually signals excitement. So I think you too are going to be laughing just like the hyenas, as this episode, it really, really, really is an exciting one.
For real, 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 for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange, losses and gains, from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Everybody, and welcome back to the For Real podcast. Today, my guest is Kay Holekamp. She's one of the leading experts in hyenas across the world, and not only that, she's becoming, she didn't realize it, my new best friend. Kay, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
This has been one that I've been really looking forward to. As we've talked, I've had the opportunity to spend time in Africa, and I know you have your project in the Mara, so I've been in the Mara. And I have seen hyenas in there, and they're one of those things, I can't wait to dig into how you did that, but this is going to be a really fun one for me, and I know for the audience as well. But like I always do, and as we were talking earlier, but the audience knows this, I'd love to hear your journey. And we can go back as far as you want to go and how you became the person that's studying hyenas. And then probably your favorite movie is probably The Lion King at some level too. So let's talk about you. Let's go wherever your journey is. We'll start wherever's and we'll just go forward.
Okay, well, after I got my PhD, my husband and I were working at UC Santa Cruz, and we bought a sailboat and fixed it up. And a few years later, we actually sailed across the Pacific, and I was halfway across the Pacific when I got word that my proposal to study spotted hyenas in Kenya had been funded by the National Science Foundation. And my husband wanted to keep sailing, so we parted ways at that point. I went to Kenya. He sailed around the South Pacific for another several years. And I joined forces with a colleague of mine, another friend from UC Berkeley, who came out and helped me. And the two of us, two dumb girls from the United States, go out in the middle of nowhere and try and figure out how you study spotted hyenas and how you monitor their interactions with their environments and so forth. So we had to count ungulates, and neither one of us had ever been trained to do that. So we'd do things like go up to the top of a nearest hill at the beginning and look around and go, wow, that's a lot of ungulates. And then later on, we actually realized, no, we have to be more systematic than that and actually have it quantifiable. And so we started running these transects, and wow, it was a big learning curve for us because we had to maintain our own vehicles and, figure out how to get our food there, because there was really nothing available in the neighborhood except Maasai livestock. And so if we wanted fruits or vegetables or cheese or eggs or whatever, you had to order those from Nairobi. So it was quite a production, and I'm trying to write a book about that now because there's a lot of funny stuff that happened along the way.
Well, those stories are great, but I'm curious. So, where did your passion or your interest become with hyenas? Where did that come from?
Sure. I actually went to East Africa with my now ex-husband Rick in 1975, and we were in a vehicle down in Ngorongoro Crater. We really hadn't seen any hyenas until that point. We were on this little safari. We were hitchhiking around the world, actually, but we stopped in East Africa for a few weeks too, because Rick knew that that was one place that I really wanted to spend some time. So we were in Ngorongoro Crater, and from a distance, we saw this group of hyenas chasing a wildebeest, and they chased it and actually brought it around and actually killed it right next to our car. And, ate it all in a few minutes. And I turned to Rick and I said, I thought those things were supposed to be skulking carrion eaters. And he said, yeah, I did too. So I went home and read about them, but I never imagined I'd actually have an opportunity to go study them, because I had previously worked on ground squirrels and I was supposed to be working on dolphins, and all sorts of other things were going on. But later on, the guy who was one of my main thesis advisors started a captive colony of hyenas at UC Berkeley to study their reproductive biology. And after he caught a bunch of cubs in East Africa, and I actually helped him catch the second cohort of those. And he and I had lunch one day when I was doing my postdoctoral work at UC Santa Cruz, and he said, it's the strangest thing. Whereas in nature, females are always socially dominant to males, in the captive situation, we're seeing males are just as likely to dominate females as vice versa. And I said, wow, that's interesting. And he said, yeah, wouldn't it be cool if somebody were to go out into nature and study social development in these animals to try and figure out how females do come to dominate males? And I said, yeah, that'd be awesome. And he said, I thought you'd be a good person to do this. And I said, okay, I wanted to do something like that since I was about 7 years old. So where do I sign? I'm ready to go. And he said, oh, well, you just have to go get yourself an NSF grant and go do it. And of course, it was a lot more complicated than that. But
we just had to go do that.
That is ultimately what happened. And so I got the chance and jumped at it, and I went there thinking I'd do a dissertation length project, maybe 3 or 4 years, and then go study monkeys or armadillos or something else. And the animals are just so odd that I was totally hooked. And I've been working with them ever since 1988 when I first started this project. And that's now, 37, almost 38 years.
That's crazy. It's funny. In my family, my daughters dominate me too. So I'm familiar with that part of it. I'm very familiar with that part of it. So let's get in there. So you go, like I had told you, and for you guys that are listening, I've been when they say the Mara, it's the Masai Mara, which is really the same thing as Serengeti. It's just the two different countries, and there's a river that divides it for the most part. But there's another place in an area in a town called Mahiga where if you go up in the hills is the Ark. Have you been up to the Ark?
Yeah, a long time.
Yeah, and that was actually the very first time. I've gone on safari a few times, and I've been there several times, but I'd never, when I was doing safari in the Mara, I hadn't seen hyenas at this point. And, at night, so for you guys that are listening, it's this guy built this big boat. It's the Ark, but it's a hotel. And they have a salt lick there that at nighttime, and it's really kind of this amazing place because they're little, I think like a doorbell sounds or something. Tell there's an animal. You're constantly going out and looking in this observation things and the different levels you are. But the salt lick, all these animals come to feed at night. And the hyenas came. That's the very first time I'd seen one. And I think, I wonder if this is your experience. My first time, I was surprised how big they are. They're a lot bigger than most people realize. I was really surprised.
Yeah, they're surprisingly large. Yeah, we've darted hyenas in Kenya that were 90 kilos, which is, almost 200 pounds. It's really a very large animal. And in southern Africa, they're even larger. I was stunned when I went to Botswana and saw hyenas there because they're more like bears almost. They're so big. It's really amazing.
Yeah. So let's talk about your project. So you get there, you get your funding, you go there with your friend. You guys are smart, but probably fairly clueless. I mean, I haven't been there. I can't imagine back in, it was 75 when you went?
No, I started going in 85 to look at hyenas, but I actually began this project in the spring of 1988.
Okay. So 88, when you go there, and I've been there, I started going probably the last 20 years. So I can't imagine, because it's still Africa, TIA, right? This is Africa. So what was it like back then? And I know you were saying you had to order eggs from Nairobi, which is quite a ways, just because when you go into, is it Mai Mahiu, which is the road goes into there, it's still, because back then, I don't know if you were flying it, but if you're driving, it was still like a 5-hour drive on that dirt road that goes in there.
Yeah, it's terrible.
That's crazy.
Yeah, 5 hours would have been pretty speedy for us. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was a long hike to go into town.
Yeah, so it had been pretty remote. So kind of, paint a picture for me what that was like, and then let's get into hyenas and all that, because it must have been this grand adventure. I mean, I'm sure when you look back now, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe we didn't even have any clue what we were doing.
Yeah, that's right. No, it was just absolutely a pristine ecosystem. The local people, the Maasai tribe, there were a couple of tiny little villages right outside the park gate, but and that was several miles from where we set up camp, because we wanted to be camping within the territory of the specific group of hyenas, just to save fuel costs and so forth.
Sure.
And it was just spectacular. So there was no livestock grazing in the park, and no humans. Very few. There was only a couple of tourist lodges that had been started a few years earlier, and that's all there was. And boy, if your car broke down, it was your problem, because there was nowhere to get it fixed. So I had to figure out how to deal with that, and had to figure out how to get our food shipped in. For the first year, all we ate we alternated between pasta and rice and beans, because those things sort of keep forever, and really got old. So we were really thrilled when we figured out we could have a person put a cardboard box full of vegetables and fruits on a lorry that came down to service one of the lodges. And if you wanted to send a letter home, okay, great, get out your aerogram, and it takes 3 weeks to get there, and then another 3 weeks to get back to you. So communication is very challenging. We had no radios, and so we just had letters, and that's all there was. And there was no phone service, certainly. So now things are very, very different. There's
traffic jams in there now when all the people coming in. I know there's a big issue going on right now with all that too, because I think it's the cost or something. It's not good right now, what I'm hearing. I haven't been back for probably 5 years. Were you guys in tents when you were doing that?
Yeah, we just lived in tents. And
okay, so for you guys listening, this is the hunting grounds where tigers and bears, but it's a hunting ground for lions. So was it just you two, or did you have people that were helping you as well?
Initially, it was just the two of us, and then we hired, because of all these
Crazy.
animals, we had no fencing, so there's animals coming in and out of camp whenever they wanted to, and, it was things like elephants and hippos that could really do a lot of damage to your tent if they scratched their butt on your tent corner, for example. That required a lot of repair. So we hired a local guy, and we had a lot of adventures with those guys. Really weren't familiar with how to use propane gas, for example. Actually, it's butane in Kenya. But so we had, stoves blowing up and refrigerators blowing up. And it was all sorts of excitement due to those kinds of issues. And now these days, it's like a cast of thousands. And just on the Hyena Project alone, I have two camps, one on either side of the park. And, the eastern side of the Mara, as you say, has become sort of overrun with tourists and livestock and other things, and there's very little regulation, no enforcement of the rules, really. And on the west side of the park, west of the Mara River, the whole area is as pristine as it was in the Pleistocene. It's really quite extraordinary. And so we set up second camp in 2008 over there, and we've been watching 3 clans of hyenas on the west side of the park and 3 clans of hyenas on the east side of the park ever since. And so it takes a fair number of vehicles and people to do that.
So I'm guessing, because because when you go through the gate, then the roads go different ways and all that kind of stuff, and you got all those high-end resorts. Like I told you when we talked the first time, I always stayed right there in one of those little villages right outside of the park. And so I'm still in a tent. It's not the real fancy ones, but there is a bathroom and a shower in them. But there's animals walking around there, and I can't only imagine what it's inside there. But the west side, nobody goes over there. Is that? I mean, because you've got all those guys driving whatever all the Mzungus going whatever direction they're going. So, what's it like over there?
They have had a moratorium on the west side of the park for building new lodges, and so we still have the same couple of lodges that we had, in the 80s over there. But until the year 2000, there were a Tanzanian tribe that, in contrast to the Maasai, would actually make their living, trapping herbivores to eat, and they sold their skins and so forth. And those guys started taking advantage of the tourists, and they'd rush out of the vegetation on either side of the dirt road with machine guns and order everybody out of the car and strip them all naked and drive away with their clothes and their possessions and everything. And it was really like the Wild West until an organization called the Mara Conservancy was hired to monitor and maintain that side of the park. And that's run by a guy named Brian Heath, who's an extraordinarily good manager of park resources. And boy, there's no nonsense over there. Nobody's harassing the wildlife. There's no people wandering around on foot. It's really, people really obey the rules there, because if they don't, they get into trouble.
Well, that's good, because, I mean, again, I don't know how long it's been since I've been in the park, but even the last time, of course, they're all rating each other now, and you got Safaricom, which is, for you guys listening, it's like our T-Mobile or whatever over there. So you've got phones, and they're all going, hey, there's lions over here, and all of a sudden you'll see 20 or 30 cars come over there full of people. I'd always, what cracks me up is all the Mzungu would be gringo for anybody that's there, would be a term, and they all got their safari outfits. It's really kind of funny.
That's right.
Their hats, we got that look. Picture Clark Gable back in the day, right? That's everybody's dressed like that. It's almost embarrassing.
It is embarrassing, but if you want to, go into Kenya with stuff like darting rifles and drugs and so forth, you put on one of those outfits and you just waved right through.
Oh, that's funny. That's interesting.
For real, 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 for real.
And we'll be right back.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at PrepVet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
Okay, so let's talk hyenas. I mean, let's go all the way, because, obviously I did a deep dive into it, but you're the person that can talk about it. Tell everybody, let's just talk about them. Let's talk about them. I guarantee I'll have some weird questions for you, but tell everybody what they're like and who they are and all the things and the misnomers of them. I know the whole scavenger thing and all that, but you're the chef. Give me the meal.
Sure. Well, I personally think that hyenas are the most interesting animals on the continent of Africa, and they are extraordinary. Their societies, which are called clans, as I mentioned earlier, are extraordinarily large and complex in contrast to any other carnivore that you know of, including wolves or cheetahs or lions, whatever. Those animal groups are typically formed of small groups of close kin, at least within each sex. And boy, hyenas not only live with their close kin, but they live with animals that are completely unrelated to them, and they've got to negotiate a really complex social scene. They're of interest to me because they appear to violate a lot of the basic rules of mammalian biology. They're built like carrion eaters with big, massive jaws that can break open big bones, but in fact, they eat very little carrion. In our park, they only eat about 5% of the diet is carrion. They kill 95% of their own prey, and so they're weird in that respect. Their societies are weird relative to those of any other mammalian carnivore. Their reproductive biology is extraordinarily odd, as are their external genitalia, which the females look very male-like, and in contrast to most mammals. Right. females are larger and more aggressive and socially dominant to males, and that's extremely unusual especially among mammals. Because, Charles Darwin was the guy who originally pointed out, oh, look at all these standard sex differences within the mammals. They have better armor, better weapons, and better defenses, and they have more muscle mass and more hemoglobin, and they're more aggressive than females. But that is absolutely the reverse in spotted hyenas. So they are just a peculiar mix, and females are actually sort of chimeric-like insofar as, they have typical female mammalian traits, like they're excellent moms. They take good care of their babies, which are extraordinarily cute, by the way, if you've never seen one.
Oh, they're awesome, by the way. For you guys listening, you got to just Google it. It'll blow your mind. And they're black when they're born, too, which is crazy.
That's right. Yeah, they have this black fur when they're born, which is supposed to inhibit aggression, but sometimes it fails. And, there is a fair number of deaths due to infanticide, as in various other species of animals. But these animals are so odd that the females look like males. They have, a clitoris that's fully elongated and erectile that forms a structure that looks just like the male's penis. And their vaginal labia are folded over and filled with connective tissue to mimic a structure that looks just like the male's testicles. And what's that about? Nobody really understands it. Although, females have complete control over mating. There is no external vaginal opening in these animals. And they're the only mammals that don't have an external vaginal opening. And if you look at their internal anatomy, instead of the reproductive tract exiting the body under the tail, as would happen on a dog or a cat or any other carnivore, the reproductive tract of the spotted hyena makes a hairpin turn right in front of the tail and exits the body through this fully erectile pseudopenis or clitoris that they use to both urinate, copulate, and give birth. And it's not a trivial matter. It's really quite extraordinary.
Well, when I read something about that, and what I read was because it's got muscles, it's really structured, and 60% of the infants die because they strangulate us when they're trying to give birth to that. Is that a real number, or is that just an internet thing?
That's actually, I think that's the kind of number that they see in captivity, where the animals don't get much exercise and they're not particularly fit. And I think that might be one reason why they have so much trouble, because we saw no death spike whatsoever when females go to have babies for the first time.
Oh, really?
And, we know we took an ultrasound machine out there for several years where we were actually looking at the fetuses in utero and then comparing the number of those to the number that we see emerging from the den, a few weeks later. And those numbers are essentially identical. So there's not massive infant death as occurs in captivity.
Well, let's talk about, they're called pups, right?
Cubs, actually.
Cubs. Okay, so let's talk about the cubs. Well, actually, I want to talk to the cubs, but let's pause for a second. What I thought was really interesting when I was reading about it, they're more closely related to cats and mongooses, but they act like dogs because they look more like dogs. And that's a crazy thing, too, which is wild.
It is wild, and they've got that funny sloping body stance, and they can, they don't use stealth to hunt. They actually, like big cats, all use stealth, but at least to some extent. But boy, these animals they've got a heart that's twice the size of any other mammal that size, and they can lope along for a long, long time, and they can just keep running and exhaust their prey. It finally turns around and tries to defend itself with its horns, and at that point, the hyena just starts darting in and taking bites, and a single hyena can bring down an antelope 3 times its body size. It's really pretty amazing.
Are they better hunters than lions? Is that true? I kind of vaguely remember that.
No, they're no less effective hunters than lions. So just like lions or cheetahs or wolves, the hyena gets its prey once every 3 or 4 tries, and so there's a fair amount of failure, especially if you're young and ignorant about how to hunt. But nevertheless, they do perfectly well, and their average hunting group size is only 1.5 hyenas, so they're really often hunting by themselves. And that's if you're a low-ranking hyena in hyena society, that's really the only way you're going to get to eat is to go off by yourself and kill something.
Well, the other thing, too, you were talking about their endurance, but they also, again, everything I have is from the internet, so we're just going to go with that. So the internet says they can run up to 40 miles an hour. That's fast.
We've clocked them at 55 kilometers per hour, so it's not quite 40 miles per hour, but It's pretty surprisingly quick for an animal that looks so clunky. They just don't look like they're going to be good predators,
No.
but they really are.
Yeah. No, I mean, and they're kind of scary looking, but they're also really cool, scary looking, and kind of weird. You know what I mean by their colors and all that. So back to the babies. Let's talk about them. What I read again, and I preface everything that everybody's listening. I preface. I read it from the internet, so the expert's here. She's going to probably debunk me every time I say something.
No, you're doing fine.
Typically, the litter's up to 3, and is that true?
Yeah, that is true.
So generally it's 1 or 2?
Yeah, it's usually either 1 or 2, yeah. The average litter size is 1.5 babies.
Well, what I thought, and this is and maybe you can talk about evolution of this or whatever. I was surprised that they only have 2 nipples.
That's right.
And what made me think is that they're cat-like. Cats have more than 2 nipples, and it's more like a primate in some ways. So,
some ways.
What's the theory behind that? Any?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely the sort of only way you're going to be able to keep your cubs alive is to, basically have a tiny litter, and really the mother has to invest really, really, really a great deal of time and energy and calories in terms of feeding those babies, because they nurse for over a year, which is very unusual among carnivores, because even lions and tigers, wean their cubs after just a couple of months. So it's pretty extraordinary. They're more like domestic cats and dogs than anything else. And the spotted hyena, they have these small litters, and then the mother has to invest in them tremendously heavily. Dads don't have any role in parental care. They really, they're so low ranking in hyena society that they can't really do much to help their cubs, or do anything for that matter. So the cubs tend to be nice to their own dads, but not to other males in the society. They're really nasty to males in general. But these animals are, they start out when they're first born, they weigh about 2 pounds and roughly a kilo, 2.2, and they're pitch black when they're born, and then when they're about 6 weeks old, they develop white eyebrows and little white rings around their eyes, and then this molt sweeps back down the body and their spots appear, and the spots never change throughout their lifetime. So we can always use those to identify them, and our main research tools are binoculars and a photo album of left and right side photos of every individual in every clan, and that's typically about 300 hyenas at any given time. So it's a lot of hyena patterns to memorize.
Well, the other thing, one of the things I read too that I thought was really interesting, well, it's all interesting, but that when they're born, their eyes are open, they have teeth, and they already have muscles, but which is really interesting. I want to talk about that, but I want to carry my thought through. The other thing I read is that the mother stays longer with the babies, or takes care of the babies longer than any other terrestrial carnivore. And what you were talking about, they have to have the milk for at least the first 6 months, but they still breastfeed for at least a year, which is crazy.
It really is crazy. Yeah, they have to invest extremely heavily, and the main reason for that is because although they're perfectly good hunters, just like lions or wolves or any of the big cats, despite that, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Welcome to my world.
No, well, yeah. Can you just remind me what you're?
We're talking about them being young and being on the mother's milk for the first year.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's where I was going. Yeah, to explain why I think they need that extended and really intensive maternal care, because even though they're perfectly good hunters, they still have a bone cracking head, so they can crack open bones that are enormous. The size of a giraffe femur is about 7 centimeters in diameter, and they can put that between their main bone cracking teeth and literally break it open, which is pretty extraordinary. And so the problem is, there's a trade-off involved in developing a skull morphology that is that robust and able to do those kinds of amazing feats in adulthood, and that is that it takes a heck of a long time to develop. So that's why moms have to help their babies so much, and they even continue to help them into adulthood because their hyena's skull doesn't finish developing until a year after it's reproductively mature, so it can conceivably be having its own babies before its head is even finished developing. So moms are very good about helping their offspring even when they're adults, and that's a big feature of hyena society, that the mothers are investing for many years in each kid.
Well, I would say in humans that their brain isn't developed for a lot longer than that, if you would really want to go with that one.
Yep.
What's interesting is that what's the theory that the reason why they're born with all the, babies are generally, their eyes are closed, and puppies and kittens and all that, because they're not really using it until they're over a year old, right? So is there any theory behind that?
Yeah, they don't use their powerful jaws to hunt and kill things until they're typically reproductively mature. However, if you're born in a twin litter, there tends to be a lot of aggression very early on. I mean, literally before the second born cub is out of its amniotic sac, the firstborn cub is likely to be attacking it. And the reason for that is it was thought for quite a while that hyenas were routinely killing their siblings. Turns out that's why we had the ultrasound machines out there. We were addressing that question because it made no sense to me that you would kill your best ally and your closest relative. There are a lot of costs involved there. And indeed, they're not routinely killing their siblings. However, if the circumstances in the ecological setting change and suddenly food becomes scarce, if a mom has two cubs, then she may only be able to feed one. And if you have one in that early, just postnatal competition between the two siblings, then you're going to be the guy who survives, and the other one's not going to be able to get access to the two nipples. So it's really pays to be a dominant sibling in a twin litter. And,
Yeah.
We've had circumstances where a mom, for example, was in a fight and she had one of her nipples amputated, basically. And, she always had twin litters, and inevitably after that, one would just die because it couldn't get access to food.
Yeah.
That system really works. But it's the function of that early aggression is simply to establish a rank relationship within the litter.
It's kind of different, but similar to Tasmanian devils, because they kind of have this something too, survival. First ones that crawls up to, because they're like minuscule and they crawl up to the nipple and they just latch on for there. So let's keep going. So it's a female dominated society. Let's talk about that. I've got so many. Can you tell? I got lots of questions, but let's talk. By the way, I'm always in favor of female dominant societies, especially with my two daughters. But let's talk about their society and how that works. I'm really curious. I'm holding my question because I've got a question for you once we understand that part.
Sure. So you want me to talk more about cubs?
Cubs going into the female dominant society, whatever. Let's just, again, it's your meal. You got to just go with me because I just bounce all over the place.
Okay. No, that's fine. Actually, I bounce all over the place too. They actually, there seems to be an endocrine mechanism. Hormonal exposure in utero seems to masculinize the females in terms of their aggressiveness. When you take androgens out of the system, you can feed a mother anti-androgens throughout pregnancy, and the female still develops that bizarre genital anatomy,
right.
But she's very mild-mannered and very tolerant of males, so it's really quite extraordinary what a little hormone exposure can do. So from the minute they pop out of the womb, females tend to be socially dominant, and we have in twin litters, which are often one male and one female, 70% of the time it's the female who dominates the litter rather than the male. Mm-hmm. So that is a function of their being more aggressive from the get-go. And, they've got a lot more to lose because the males are eventually all going to grow up and leave the clan in which they were born and go emigrate so they can reproduce somewhere else, presumably because the females in their natal clans aren't interested to mate with them. But the females spend their whole lives in their natal clans, and if they develop relationships with all the other hyenas in the clan when they're first born, basically, and growing up at the den, they live at the den for much of the first year of their lives, and then they start traveling around the home range with the mother, and later on their own. And for a long time, because their skulls aren't finished developing, they have a really hard time feeding themselves once they're weaned. And so, a lot of mothers try and wean their cubs when the Great Migration is in the Mara, and we have a million extra wildebeest and 10,000 extra zebra. And
July or whatever it is, right?
that's right. It's a lot of food. And boy, those hyenas really perk up when we start seeing wildebeest strings coming up from the south.
Yeah.
But so the interesting thing is that, in captivity, males are just as likely to dominate females as vice versa, even after they're reproductively mature. And that's why I went off to study these hyenas in the first place, to figure out why that was. And what happens is the males continue to maintain, both sexes acquire ranks just below that of their mothers as they're growing up in the clan. And they can dominate everybody, large or small, below their moms, even when they're still little. And they have no trouble. Nobody has any trouble dominating immigrant males, even the youngest cubs. But the males do retain their mom's ranks as long as they stay in the natal clan. But the fact is that most of them, almost 100% of them for that matter, in our population, disperse and move to a new clan before they breed. And that's when they become socially subordinate. It seems that in order to become socially integrated into a new clan, they're obliged to do a lot of obsequious kind of behavior where they're groveling in front of even small cubs, and certainly in front of females, and showing them that, okay, I'm not going to compete with you for your food. I'm just here to provide some good sperm for you. And so they, they move to these new clans, and that's where females clearly prefer to mate with these immigrants over the adult natal males who might still be in the group before they disperse, because they disperse sometime between 24 months and about 62 months of age. And hyenas can live to be 25 or 26, so at least in nature. In captivity, they live longer than that. But it's most of their lives that they spend in another social group rather than the one into which they were born.
So, yeah, that's where one of my questions was. So, 'cause when I was reading this stuff, it said around 2 years old, they go to some other clan. So, because it's kind of confusing someone, why don't they just hang out with where they already know where it is? So they go there because it's more for mating, I'm assuming, is one of the big things. But when they go to, real quickly, when they go to the other clan, do they stay with that clan forever then, once they find their new clan?
Not necessarily. About 40% of immigrant males disperse again, and we think that's because they're just not doing well reproductively as they might be elsewhere. So they've invested a lot of time. I mean, imagine this: you're the son of an alpha female in your natal clan, so that means you've got your mom and maybe a sister higher ranking than you out of 60 or 70 animals. Then, of your own volition, one day you pack up and you move to a different group, and if all goes well, you become you're at the bottom of the whole bloody pack. So if you move from one clan to another that are the same size, you go from being ranked 2 or 3 out of 70 to 69th or 70th out of 70. And so that's a huge hit in terms of feeding yourself.
Right.
But the payoff, there has to be some enormous payoff to make that worthwhile. And the payoff seems to be breeding, so they can mate when they get to females who didn't grow up with them.
Sex rules, I guess. But
Yes.
And we'll be right back.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at PrepVet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
So I want to talk a little bit about, and I'm going to call it the alpha female is the queen of the clan, right? Or whatever the term is.
Yeah, that's right.
And so what I think's interesting that I read is that, so you basically now have, if you're the queen, it's kind of like if you think of anybody, you have a royal family, because they're the higher ranked people in you're part of, if I'm the queen and I've got cubs, male or female, the female is going to be ahead of the male more than likely, obviously, but you're still up there. which is really interesting how they do that. This is my family. We're the dominant people.
Yes, well, what happens is when they're brought to the communal den, first cubs are initially born in a tiny little isolated natal den where nobody else can attack them or bother them. Then when they're 3 or 4 weeks old, moms pick them up in their massive bone-cracking jaws very gently and bring them to the communal den, and they spend the next several months of their lives there. And it's while they're at the communal den that the moms visit the communal den a couple times a day, typically early morning and around sunset. And when she comes to visit, if her cub's playing with another cub and suddenly the playmate becomes unduly aggressive and unduly rough and her cub squeaks, she'll just stand right up and go over and push that cub away or even be meaner to it and bite it. So, moms take their cub sides from the very beginning of life, and the cubs learn very quickly that, mom can dominate these guys, but she can't dominate the ones over here, which are higher ranking than she is. And so the cub, learns sometimes challenging lessons along the way. And every once in a while, they typically meet everybody in the clan while they're still living at the communal den, because everybody in the clan visits it. So they get to know the new members and introduce themselves to the cubs. And the cubs are crazy about introducing themselves to everybody else. And when they're sometimes they don't get a chance to meet necessarily absolutely everyone. So we saw one cub go out into the world, and she encounters a higher ranking adult female that she just had never happened to meet at the communal den. And so this half-grown cub is very aggressive to this adult female, who steps away and goes, that doesn't seem right. And then she just lit into this cub and was very mean to it because the cub was acting inappropriately and should have been duly, grovelly to her instead of aggressive. So they get taught some hard lessons sometimes.
I thought it was interesting. So if I'm the male at 2 years old or whatever age it is, and I decide to go to the other clan, if I get there, if there's a brand new cub that's part of the royal family, I'm still below them. I'm the big guy. And you're, like you said, using the term, I'm groveling to everybody to let me in. It's pretty crazy.
That's exactly right. Yeah, no, the male's behavior changes. They step over this invisible boundary between their territory and the next clan's territory. And all of a sudden, the male's going out on an exploratory excursion to check out these surrounding clans. And all of a sudden, his ears go back, his tail goes down between his legs. He's sort of creeping along, looking around, and he's grinning sometimes, which is a hyena appeasement behavior, submissive behavior.
Yeah.
And you look around, there aren't any other hyenas in sight. It's like this guy's just hedging his bets in case anybody's looking. I am being grovelly. And it's amazing. And then they behave that way to even the tiniest cubs. And so, of course, the tiniest cubs can dominate them. It's really pretty extraordinary to see.
It would be so fun to watch, and it could be funny to watch, too, at some level.
Yeah, it is very funny.
So, I'm bouncing a little bit. I want to talk about their bite deal, because, like you were saying, they can bite through a bone that's quite big. But one of the advantages of doing that, they're one of the only, or I don't know if they're the only ones that can bite through the bone that gets all that bone marrow. So they're getting other nutrients that other animals aren't doing, and they're also good for recycling when something's dead, so you don't have bones all over the place. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think hyenas, spotted hyenas in general, because they're the most abundant large carnivore in Africa. And as you mentioned, they're large, second in size only to lions among all the carnivores available there. And they perform really important ecosystem services. So yeah, they're definitely the cleanup crew in all these African ecosystems, and they live pretty much everywhere in Africa, including the hottest, driest deserts and montane forests, where you saw them at the Ark, for example, and in the rolling grasslands of Kenya and Tanzania, and the dry, arid regions in southern Africa. They're in Okavango Delta in extraordinary abundance. So they're pretty much everywhere, and they occur even in cities. In like now we're developing a city right next to the Mara, which is where you used to camp in your tented camp, and those are still there. But
right.
There's a whole city that's grown up around them, and now the hyenas are starting to forage at the town dump. Because people butcher their own livestock and put the offal out for the dogs and hyenas to eat. And so their diets are changing, everything's changing. But in these cities in northern Ethiopia, local people believe that hyenas eat evil spirits, and so these animals are honored there. And you see them just walking up and down the street with the people who live there. It's really pretty amazing. Everywhere else in Africa, hyenas are considered pests because they go after livestock.
Sure.
In northern Ethiopia, they don't bother the livestock. They just go to the dump and feed there because it's so much easier. We've seen them walking past a donkey in the middle of the night. Our hyenas in Kenya would tear that donkey to pieces in no time, just even as a game, and then they'd eat it. And these guys didn't even recognize this donkey as a potential prey item. It was really amazing. So
that's an area I want to go to because it's a Harar? Is that Ahara? How's that pronounced?
Yeah, Harar is one city, but we've been studying them in the city of Mekelle, which is about 400,000 people.
So I know. If it's the same, I don't care. I don't care about what the city is. I've always wanted to go visit it because at nighttime the locals feed them. They come up and they're scary looking. If you haven't seen them alive, they're scary looking, and they feed them like out of their hand. And I'm fascinated by that, and I have so many questions about that. So I'm gonna give you a bunch of an answer, whatever it was. So I'm wondering because has there ever been like a domesticated hyena where people has it as a pet? They're kind of like pets there a little bit. I know they recognize people, sort of. Do people call them by names? Because they're really intelligent. We haven't got there yet, but I know based on what I've read, they're extremely intelligent, like the primates. We can get into that part. But are they, because they recognize people, they know people, and I guess they know who's feeding them is probably the main reason. But talk about that and whatever direction you want to go. It's just so interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, in Harar, feeding the hyenas has become a major tourist attraction, and there are various groups of hyenas that live in the city of Harar, and various human families have actually sort of carved out a niche for themselves, feeding one particular group of hyenas that would come to their feeding station every night. And the tourists can actually, they can feed them out of their hands if they're brave. I wouldn't do that because I've seen what a hyena can do to a human body, and it's really pretty dangerous. But yeah, and then in the other northern Ethiopian cities, there's no tourist attraction, so the hyenas are just all feeding themselves, and they're feeding on the offal and other trash that people throw out that's organic. And in the city of 400,000 people of Mekelle, there are estimated to be over 800 hyenas, and that is an amazing hyena density for a tiny area. And they routinely remove every year over 200 tons of this animal waste that would otherwise be just stinking up the whole city. And because everybody has livestock, everybody butchers their own livestock, and so there's a lot of animal waste being sent to the dumps, and the hyenas take good care of that. And their immune systems are really very astonishing. They can do things like eat anthrax or tuberculosis and not die, and they don't even get even remotely sick. They're just amazing. We've seen them get bitten in the face by poisonous snakes, and they're fine. It's just amazing. But they saved the people thousands and thousands of dollars of virtue of, because their livestock would potentially get infected from this offal that's got either anthrax or tuberculosis in it, and the hyenas remove all that without, even feeling the slightest twinge of stomach ache. I mean, they're amazingly resilient, tough animals.
Have there been any studies on that? That's interesting. Like what the resilience to any kind of disease state. Has there been any studies on that?
Yeah, I had a grad student who's actually now working on Tasmanian devils in Tasmania, but he's trained as an immunologist, and we were both really interested in understanding how the hyenas can do that kind of thing, just eat these toxins that would kill you or me in a heartbeat. They're just not even bothered by them. And so he started, we actually got money from the U.S. Army when they heard they could eat anthrax and not be bothered by it. They were hoping the hyena immune system would offer some protection against that for people.
Right.
Turns out it's not that simple. And so, he studied their immune function for about 3 or 4 years, and then moved on to do his current work with Tasmanian devils. But, to the extent that he was able to pursue this, it looked like their immune function is essentially just like ours. So that means that the bacteria fighting and viral fighting abilities of the immune system seem to be part of a very intricate cascade of chemistry that happens, when animals eat something toxic, and their immune systems can handle it. Ours just can't.
Oh, that's too bad. I mean, that would be really interesting. So it's just because it's multiple steps at that point, and I guess is what the deal is. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's right. We were hoping to actually find a substance that, you have a food poisoning event at Jack in the Box where you just go to the emergency room and you take this antibacterial protein and drip it into people's veins and it's fine. I mean, that's what we were hoping for, but definitely isn't going to be that straightforward.
That's too bad. So one thing, too, I read is that the way I don't know if it's their hooves or their paws or whatever they call them, they're designed where they can turn really quick. They're really fast. They can turn that. They're, like I was telling you, for you guys that are listening, we had a conversation before we started recording, but I just love all this weird stuff you learn so many different things about animals, and these guys it's unbelievable. I mean, I didn't read anything.
That's right. There's nothing.
Yeah. I mean, well, I wonder why you've been doing it for 30 something years. I don't know.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is there are 3 other living species of hyenas walking on the planet Earth, and they don't seem to have these same capabilities. So they have, 2 of the 3 species have big bone cracking jaws like the spotted hyena does. But then the third one is a little diminutive carnivore that's the last in a long line of what are referred to as the dog-like hyenas, and they occupied the niches that are these days occupied by dogs. And the aardwolf is actually so specialized that it just feeds on nothing but termites. And so that's the 4th existing hyena species, and none of them have the weird genitalia.
Aardwolf is the 4th one. I knew there were 4.
That's right. Yeah, there's striped hyenas, brown hyenas, spotted hyenas, and the aardwolf. And
I didn't know it was a hyena.
So
so let's talk about their vocalization, and we can get to the laughing thing here at the end. But they have 11 different. Is there 11 different distinctive ways of communicating? Is that it?
Yeah, and it because they sort of one can blur into the next one. There's a sort of a continuous stream of all of those. So yeah, I mean the guy who went out to systematically study spotted hyenas for the first time, his name was Hans Crook, and he was interested in their behavior and was the guy to realize, they're not eating carrion, they're killing their own prey. And, he's the one who first described complicated societies. And he had come straight from Scotland. So he's the guy who got to call their social groups clans rather than pods or packs or anything else. So, we've known about this for quite a long time.
Oh, Scotland and clan. That's funny.
It is funny.
That's interesting. So, I saw one, too. They also call them sometimes, the problem with it, people just make up things, right? So cackles is one of the terms I saw.
Yeah.
It's kind of like in giraffes, when they're all traveling together, they literally call that group a journey. And no, that's in the real world, that's really not what they are. And then the other thing with giraffes, all of it's kind of funny. They're almost for books, right? So if they're really tall, they call them a tower. And not that they're really tall, but they call them a tower of giraffes too, and which was relative, but none of it in the real world. That's not what anybody uses. You guys use clans, you use cackles. I guarantee you don't. And there was another one too. I can't remember what the other one. I like the term cackle, but I totally know it's not used.
It really sounds. Their cackle sounds a lot more like a human hysterical giggle. It's that, and so that's one that signals either fear or social excitement or frustration. It's not a happy sound. In other words, like it is in humans, and even in some of the great apes. But they also have a really wonderful long-distance vocalization called the whoop, and that's sort of the commonest sound to hear in the African night if you're out in the bush. They're just these animals. Each one has a distinctive tone. It's like a ringtone. It's all different, and you can hear them by in the night and recognize, oh, there goes Pavarotti. He's got the very elaborate whoop, and this guy's got a very boring, simple one over here. And you wonder if females picking their mates based on how complicated their vocal repertoires are. I think it would be interesting to know that.
Yeah, I can't remember. There was some animal that was based on their sounds. They liked if they made a better sound, they were more likely to mate than the other ones. I can't remember.
That's true in a lot of birds. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So what did we miss? I know we kind of glossed over a ton of stuff, Oh, you know what? I wanted to talk. I know there's one thing. One of the things that you've debunked, and let's talk about, because most people think of them, and we've talked about it a little bit, but let's be a little bit more specific. Most people think that they're scavengers, but they're really elite hunters. So you're the one that's really debunked that out there in the world. Let's forget that guy from Scotland that calls them clans, but let's talk about that, because that's, you're the one that's really been a leading forefront of that. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, we were seeing these animals, as I mentioned, in the very first place. That was the first thing I ever saw a hyena do, is kill a wildebeest right in front of my eyes, right beside our car.
Right.
And, we've seen now hundreds and hundreds of kills over the years. And, it's typically, a hyena hunts, as I mentioned, they don't use stealth, but if you're a hungry hyena walking along and you see a little group of antelope over here, then typically what they do is they'll actually rush it very briefly, just for a few seconds, and then stop and watch. And if they find somebody who's unusually slow, which is either an elderly or sick individual, somebody with a damaged limb, or a pregnant female, those are the most vulnerable animals. And then if they see one that they think is vulnerable, they'll take off after it and chase it for sometimes miles and miles. As I mentioned, they have great endurance, and then, they actually will, exhaust the antelope typically. Sometimes the antelope will actually, run into a thicket and get tangled up, and the hyenas can just jump on it there. Sometimes they'll slip in slippery mud, for example. Hyenas often hunt in the late afternoon after a rainstorm, because that's when the ungulates have their most unfortunate footing. They have a hard time. But yeah, a single hyena can run down an antelope, and wildebeest is 3 times the size of a spotted hyena, an adult, and so is a topee, for example. And hyenas can easily kill those. A single hyena can easily kill one of those, and we've seen them actually kill even larger things. But typically takes a group of hyenas to catch a zebra or a buffalo or a giraffe, because those are a much more challenging prey. And so whereas the average hunting group size for a wildebeest is like 1.5 hyenas, for a zebra it's more like 9 or 10 hyenas. So they really need a bunch, because the zebras in their social system have an organized defense. The stallion will rush out and kick at any potential predator who's trying to go after his females or the foals in a herd. And the other antelope don't have that. Most of them don't have that kind of organized defense. Buffalo do. They're also very challenging prey for hyenas, or anybody for that matter. But yeah, they're perfectly good hunters, and they kill by eviscerating rather than having a death grip like the big cats do, for example. And so it's not pretty to watch. And so you have to really be a hyena cheerleader in order to fully appreciate how hard it is to feed yourself if you're a top-level carnivore in these African ecosystems.
Well, that leads into probably one of the last things we're going to talk about. They're smart enough to know they wait for the rain because they can get them. Let's talk about their intelligence. One of the things I thought was really fascinating when I was looking at that, they're pretty much, their frontal cortex is, their brain, their intelligence is evolved similar to the way humans' intelligence evolves. Their frontal cortex is way more developed and they're very similar to primates in intelligence. They've got fundamental use of tools and all kinds of things. I don't know that people realize how smart they really are.
Yeah, no, they don't really need to use tools, because they've got a whole toolbox in their mouth. They've got slicing tools and hammers, anvils, that they can break open big things, and they've got front teeth that just tear off big chunks of meat. But as I mentioned earlier, it takes a long time to develop that. So, over 3 years to have a fully developed skull. And, just trying to clean off a hyena skull is really hard, because those muscles are attached to these great huge sagittal crests, this big ridge of bone going down the middle of the head, and their jaws are just massive, and so they have these giant cheekbones that makes their faces look very wide, and these big jaw closing muscles come down both within and outside of the cheekbones, and boy, they are really able to exert some fantastic forces, way more than people had previously calculated. We actually did a study where we were feeding captive hyenas in Berkeley cow femurs, and just seeing how readily they could do that. And everybody, all the adults could, easily eat a cow femur in like 20 minutes. But then we take those same cow femurs back to Michigan State and put them in an Instron machine, which is a device that tells you what kind of force is being exerted to crack it.
Right.
And, it's something like 16,000 newtons. I mean, it was really amazing how much power there. Yeah. And they have this special, the head, their bone cracking teeth are right here, and there's a big arc of the vaulted forehead actually dissipates the stresses imposed by bone cracking, which would otherwise potentially break facial bones on hyenas. That doesn't happen. But yeah, back to their intelligence. They're really, as I mentioned, they don't really need to use tools, although they're very good at figuring out how to do things, open boxes and open refrigerators.
I heard they open cars and get into cars and stuff like that, which is crazy.
A couple of hyenas in our study groups that actually figured out how to open the car door. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
They're really scary, actually. But it's their social intelligence that's really stunningly primate-like. And so we've been sort of following along over the years in the footsteps of the primatologists who were assessing cognitive capabilities in free-living monkeys and apes. And so we'd see somebody do an experiment that we thought, okay, I think we can do that. And hyenas like to do playback experiments, for example, to ask them, do they recognize this voice versus that voice? And yes, they do. And they really know the voices of every individual in their entire social group. And they also know, when they listen to animals from surrounding clans, they know, oh, that's so-and-so in that clan. It's nothing to do with me. And so, they don't worry about that as long as it's coming from outside the territory boundaries. But if you play the same voice from inside the territory boundaries, everybody gets excited and races over to nail this guy who's transgressing in the clan's territory. So in all these respects, we've done a lot of experiments about their social intelligence, and just a few more recently on their non-social intelligence. How do they solve problems like to feed themselves? So we actually would just put a big chunk of meat in a rebar cage and have a sliding bolt that opened the door, and if the hyena could open the door, then it could get at this meat. And so, they're not particularly great at that, and I think the reason is because that takes a while to figure those kind of problems out. And they just, they're on a pretty tight time budget, and they don't want to, waste too much time dealing with something they may or may not be able to get into. And they know how to get other food in nature. Because if you give the same task to captive hyenas where they have all day to mess with it, they always open the boxes.
Oh, sure. They did a study with, if you're familiar with the dog, God, what's it called? The Free Ranging Dog Project. Are you familiar with that?
I don't know it.
So it's in Morocco, and they're looking at these dogs. It's similar to what the hyenas are doing in that town in Ethiopia, where they're getting food from the leftover garbage, basically, right? But they started doing studies to see if they were lazier by where they'd have a box that had food in there and they have to figure out how to get into it and do that. And it was a similar thing. Some would do it and some wouldn't, because they're going, well, there's garbage right over there. Why would I want to waste my time looking for that kind of thing?
Exactly, yeah.
It's kind of crazy. The other thing I thought, too, was cool is that they can count, counting being a relative term, but and I can't remember what the example was, but they actually do count. They know that there's 5 there or 20 there or whatever.
Yeah, and it's very important that they be able to assess relative numbers, because typically if you have a battle between members of two separate clans at a territorial boundary, like, for example, Clan A will chase a wildebeest down and bring it down just over the boundary in the clan of Territory B, and then Territory B guys will come racing if they detect this and try and, they'll start a war and try and chase everybody away. And it's the team that has the most members that typically wins those things. So, yeah, sometimes, you've got 20, 30 hyenas on both sides. So it's, sort of amazing that they can, figure that out. But we also have done playback experiments asking, okay, if you play back the voices of 2 or 3 different individuals, do they respond differently to each one? And yes, they do. So they could clearly, get that this isn't just, a random group of hyenas or one guy, really multiple voices.
Cool. I know we kind of talked about it. Let's talk one more thing, and then I'm going to let you go. I know I could keep you here for days. So the laughing thing, you said it, but just for you guys listening, we said the cackle. So everybody, hyenas are known for their laugh, but can you just kind of, again, reiterate what that is so people know?
Sure.
I mean, it's I've heard it in the wild. It's pretty crazy when you hear it, but it's not what you think it is. So let's just put it that way.
No, it's true. To me, it sounds just like hysterical human giggling. And in fact,
right.
The guy from Scotland, Hans Crook, actually he named it a giggle. And those of us who study them all call it a giggle. And there's a lot of information in a giggle, too, about, who's talking and what's going on. They're called the laughing hyena. None of the other extant hyenas do that. So, we studied striped hyenas for a while in southern Kenya in a very dry area, and they were virtually silent all the time. It's hardly ever heard them make even a single sound. And brown hyenas, boy, they can make a couple of sounds, but their repertoires are tiny compared to the repertoire of a spotted hyena. So when a cub wants to nurse, it makes a little sound like fingernails on a blackboard. It's really annoying, and that's what gets mom's attention and causes her to lie down and let the baby nurse. He's real, Mom, I'm hungry. And so, we call that a squidder, and they make those kinds of sounds. And then this whoop vocalization you hear under a lot of different circumstances when a cub and a mom are separated and they want to find one another. One or both will whoop and then get together that way, because these whoops carry about 5 kilometers. They're really a long distance vocalization. And then they have all kinds of other things like squeals and growls and groans. They call their cubs out of the den with a groan. Sounds like just a very low pitched groaning sound. And that's, Hans Crook called it that too. And anyway, there's a lot of different vocalizations that they use for different purposes.
What's funny is that Scottish guy, he's trying to claim everything. By the way, Kyle is Scottish, just as an FYI. So I got a lot of, I know what those Scots are like. So what have we not covered that you can think of? I know we did a wide breadth of multiple things. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you'd like to bring up that you can think of?
Yeah, I'd like to make clear that the nature of hyena societies is much more monkey-like than it is carnivore-like. And that to me is a really, I think it's one reason that their brains did get to be so large, especially frontal cortex, which is an area that, sort of is important in social interactions and monitoring your group mates and so forth. And, when a male disperses, he has to learn a whole new cast of characters and figure out how they're are related to one another, whereas the females just have to maintain the same set of relationships throughout their lives with the animals they grew up with. And when a cub is born, say you're a cub and you're born and you get to be an adult and then your mom dies. Well, nevertheless, you've inherited her whole social network. So you're, spending time with the same animal she spent time with and so forth, and really powerful effects like that.
Well, when I was thinking about it when we were talking, and we may have even said this the first time we ever talked, but it reminds me a lot of baboons. Even though the male's still the guy, the women dominate. If you mess with the one woman, all the other gals get together and say, "Don't be messing with me, my friend."
Yep.
So it's very similar because they've got that whole, their whole dynamic. It's really, I think, very similar. The guy's the boss, but not so much.
Yeah, they're about twice the size, and typical baboon male is about almost twice the size of a female, and in spotted hyenas, the female's 10% larger than the male by very different biology. Really strange.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to cover?
No, I think we've gone a lot of places. So
that goes good with my brain. So if people want to find out more information about you, I don't know if you do social media or anything like that. Is there anything that they can do to find you? And by the way, for you guys listening, once we go over that, I will have that in the description. But can you point people that are listening now where they may want to go and look at different things and all that?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's really an excellent little video on YouTube called "The Insane Biology of the Spotted Hyena," and this is sort of based largely on and other interviews with me where, the animal's biology is really nicely portrayed, virtually all aspects of it in a nutshell, if you will. And so it's a sort of a quick and dirty place to learn a lot about hyenas, but it's really a great YouTube video.
So for you guys listening, I'll have that link. If you're listening now, the link's in the description. So if you go to the description of the episode, you can find that. Okay, so we've come to that time that I know you just can't wait to hear is my silly animal joke.
Yeah.
But for everybody that's listening, I always say this. If you've got grandkids, you want your grandkids in, you've got kids, you want to be on the show, nieces, nephews, whatever. If you email me at mkyle@forrealpodcast.com, I will gladly have you on. I know my jokes aren't very good. I hate asking the guests to do it today. I'm going to let Kay get out of it, and I'll be telling the joke. But seriously, if you have it, and if you've listened before, you know I've had other people on. But if you want to be on, I'm gladly will have you again at mkyle@forrealpodcast.com. So it's random how this came because this joke is going to be relative to something we just talked about just a little while ago. So it's perfect. So here's my joke. So what do you call a polite hyena?
I don't know. What do you call a polite hyena?
A well-mannered giggler. I can't believe we got into giggling. That's so funny. That was not part of the plan. Anyways, Kay, thanks so much for being on the show. You've been awesome to me. I'm glad you've been able to take the time. I'm sure everybody that's listening, they really appreciate it. But I know you're a busy person. I really do appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Been fun.
Well, thank you so much. And then for everybody else that's listening, as I always say, please pass the word on about the show, follow, listen, do all those things you have to do for us to grow the audience and tell people about it. Because with you guys, I'm able to get good guests, with the show having the rankings that we have, it's because of you guys. So really, it's really important we're doing it. And I totally appreciate it. And by the way, if you have an idea that you think would be a great topic for the show, again, email me. I'm going to repeat it again at mkyle@forrealpodcast.com. Or if you want to just send me a message, please do. But most importantly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for real.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.